Welcome everybody, and this is our Monday morning session with Ambassador Mark Grossman. The Peoria Area World Affairs Council and the International Affairs Organization at Bradley University are co-sponsoring this program. And with that, I'd like to have Emma Richards introduce our speaker, please. I think you have to unmute yourself, maybe. There you go.
All right. So welcome everyone. I am the Vice President of the International Affairs Organization at Bradley University, and Angela was so great to have us co-sponsor this event. So thank you guys for joining us this morning. Today we have a very exciting conversation with Ambassador Mark Grossman, who has over 29 years in the U.S. Foreign Service. He served as the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs until his retirement in 2005. During that time, he helped gain support for the international response to 9/11. He helped to manage U.S. policies in the Balkans and Colombia, and also helped promote key expansions of the NATO alliance. After that, he was the vice chairman of the Cohen Group until 2011, when President Obama called him back to be the U.S. Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan. There, he helped promote the international effort to support Afghanistan by shaping a bunch of international meetings all over the world, and he also played an important part in managing U.S. relations with Pakistan. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ambassador Mark Grossman.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your kind introduction. I very much appreciate it. Let me say, first of all, thanks to the Peoria Council and Angela, a nice invitation. Thank you very much. I am a long supporter of the World Affairs Councils of America. In fact, Angela and I first met when I had the good fortune to be the president of the National World Affairs Council's institution. And so I thank you all for your interest in international affairs. I thank you for your interest in World Affairs Councils, and I hope you'll continue to support the one in Peoria. And thank you also to Bradley University for being a co-sponsor. I think it's fantastic that we have so many students on the call today. So I have been invited to talk a little bit about a project that I'm involved in, which is headquartered at Harvard University, to try to think through what we need to do to have a foreign service, a diplomatic corps for the United States of America for the 21st century. And as Emma kindly said, I had the honor to be a Foreign Service officer for 29 years and then returned to the State Department for a couple of years. And so I have a great interest in this. I have an interest in it personally. I have an interest in it in terms of my profession. I have an interest in it in terms of the importance of diplomacy to the United States of America. And so with your permission, I thought maybe I'd just spend a moment or two and tell you a little bit about the project, how we got started, what we've been doing, what's next, and some of the things that we've been able to find. I know Angela took the opportunity to send to some of you, all of you who have registered, a short draft piece of paper that we've done. It's the one that's on Belfer Center letterhead, and I'll come back to that because one of the things that we have been trying to do through a number of these sessions with World Affairs Councils is to really start a dialogue on what you all think the Foreign Service ought to be doing, what you all think the U.S. Diplomatic Service ought to be doing for American citizens. So I can tell you that we started this project, and I'm joined by three other of my retired colleagues, Ambassador Nick Burns, Ambassador Nancy McEldowney, and Ambassador Marcy Reese. And a couple of years ago, we said to ourselves, this might be an opportunity. It might be the time to see if we can't think about what a foreign service for the 21st century might look like. Imagine we spent an enormous amount of effort getting ready, thinking about our plans, and then of course, like with everyone else, COVID hit, and we had to adjust our plans and adjust the way we went forward. But in some ways, and I don't mean to diminish in any way the terrible impact of COVID, in some ways, it's been a little bit of an advantage to us because we have been able to gather groups of people to talk about the Foreign Service, talk about the future over the past 8 months. And what we've done is we've had 18 workshops with people who are still in the Foreign Service, people who are at the State Department, people who left the Foreign Service. Many of them left because they didn't like it. We've spoken with former military colleagues, intelligence officers, all kinds of people in business and other places that have some connection to the Foreign Service, and I think want the Foreign Service to succeed. So we've had 18 of these workshops, and we've just now started to think about what our recommendations might look like. We're not the only people, obviously, involved in this effort. There's a lot of people thinking about the future of the State Department, the future of the Foreign Service. So, for example, there's a very good parallel study going on by the Council on Foreign Relations, which is chaired by former Deputy Secretary of State William Burns. They're looking at the big questions of the State Department. I don't know how many of you follow it or get the magazine, but about 3 or 4 weeks ago, there was a very interesting article in The Economist about the state of American diplomacy. So one of the things that we found is that this is a topic that's on people's minds, that people are thinking a little bit about what next in American diplomacy. So as I say, having had these workshops, having talked to hundreds and hundreds of people, we started to focus in on some of our draft recommendations. And that's what you see in the piece of paper that Angela sent to you. And I think very importantly, and I certainly won't go and kind of go through every paragraph of this, but I want to call your attention to the very first paragraph, because there are a couple of things here I think that are enormously important. One, we have concluded that there's really a crisis in the Foreign Service, that people are concerned about their careers today, who will follow them tomorrow, and very importantly is a line that we put there at the very top, that we think the Foreign Service is losing its capacity to serve the American people effectively. What's that mean? It means that there has become a misalignment or a disconnect between the people of the United States, citizens of the United States, and their Foreign Service. Now that's not 100% true. When people come to an embassy and they need a passport or they get in trouble, or the thousands of people that the Foreign Service successfully repatriated to the United States in the beginning of COVID, those are all services to American citizens. The service, I think, does a very good job of helping American businesses do business abroad. But the whole concept, we think, that there is a citizen interest in diplomacy, a citizen interest in the Foreign Service, that has started, it seems to us, to fray. And one of the things that we have most interested in is trying to see if we can't reinvigorate this connection between American citizens and their diplomats. And that's been a very big focus of the workshops that we've been trying to have. I should say also that one of the things that we have been very straightforward and very honest about is that the challenges that the Foreign Service and our diplomatic service face are not all from the outside. Many, many of them stem from misalignments in the culture of the Foreign Service itself. Many of them stem from the way we treat each other. Many of them stem from where we come from, how we act, how we don't connect often with people in the rest of the United States. So one of the things that you will find, I hope, in this conversation today, number one, and number two, in the report itself, is that this is not about blaming a lot of people from the outside. This is an internal question very much to the Foreign Service. So we have looked at some ideas. We've given 5 ideas here on this piece of paper. As you can imagine, we have then many, many backup ideas and specific ideas to be in favor, to be for, under these 5 large headings. But the first one is about getting the Congress involved. And here again, the American people. One of the most interesting things is that since the turn of the century, since the turn of the last century, actually, 1900s, there have only been 3 efforts to try to define in legislation what the Foreign Service is and what it's supposed to do. In 1924, in 1947, just after World War II, and again in 1980. And so it's been 40 years since the Foreign Service has last been debated, if you will, in the Congress. Since the last Foreign Service Act. And we have come to conclude that it's time for something new. And if you think about what's been done on the U.S. military side with things like the Goldwater-Nichols Act or the changes on the intelligence. They've really worked hard to find new ways to talk about new missions. And I think the State Department and the Foreign Service needs to do so as well. It turns out that this is quite a controversial thing to say. There are many people who are currently in the Foreign Service or retired from the Foreign Service say, oh, no, don't change this 1980 Act. That's where a lot of our benefits come from. There are many good things. And I admit, there's some many good things in that 1980 Act. But we have just come to conclude that 40 years in, given the long and many changes that have occurred, it's time for something new. The other recommendation that we're making, and you see it there on number 3, is we'd also like to argue for a depoliticization. That's a terrible word. We can't think of anything better so far. But to have less political influence at lower levels in the State Department. And we are contemplating putting out a number and saying that 90% of our ambassadors overseas should be career people and 10% should be political appointees, non-career people. And I'm not for zero. I think that non-career people can bring an enormous amount of talent and expertise to the representation of the United States of America. But we want to make the case that a vast majority of that number should be in the career service. And we make a similar recommendation for senior officials at the State Department itself. And then fourth, not finally, but fourth is questions of the personnel system. And I have to say, when we started this, we thought to ourselves, oh, I don't know, we shouldn't really have to get too deep in the personnel system. But it became very clear very fast that in a people-oriented enterprise like the State Department, if you're not dealing with the people and you're not dealing with how the people are recruited and retained and trained and professionally educated, then you're missing the point. And so you'll see there several recommendations that we think are really important. And they all come down to the idea of a more professional service. People, as I say, who are better trained, who have professional education. And so this is a really important effort on our agenda. I'd say that it really importantly is the second of those ticks, which is the commitment to racial, ethnic diversity and inclusion. And I have to tell you, every single person on this call and on this Zoom, is that when we started out, the 18 workshops that we had, again and again and again, what was on people's minds was the lack of diversity at the Foreign Service, the lack of diversity, racial diversity, the lack of fair play for everyone, and very importantly, questions of inclusion as well. And the numbers are pretty stunning. For Hispanic Americans, African Americans, the numbers are almost exactly the same as they were 20 years ago. And that really just can't be in the United States that we have today. And so we were just struck by how much this is on people's minds. And then finally, there's the question of name. And we've decided to be for something new, which is, I don't know how many of you have had this experience, but I have had it a lot. It is when you visit places and you say, people say, well, what do you do? Well, I'm in the Foreign Service. And people think you're in the Forest Service. Or people think you're in the Foreign Legion. And we decided that the idea that this was somehow foreign, it had to go. And that what we ought to do is say that we want a United States diplomatic service. And some people have said, oh, don't waste your time changing names, doesn't matter. But we do think that it matters. And we'd like to give people who are in the service today, who hope to be in the service in the future, some view about what it's like. And that is not a foreign entity. It's the U.S. diplomatic service. And we want that to be, a new name going forward. I'm glad, obviously, to talk about any of these recommendations. As I say, the reason it says draft on it is because we are hoping that you will have views and that you will have things to say that we can learn and that we can incorporate into the final report. I should say, for a last point from me, so what's the plan? The plan is that we are now about to go into a series of conversations with former secretaries of state to get their views, former deputy secretaries of state, We've had our first conversations with members of Congress, Democrats, and we will do Republicans here this next week. And our goal is to put a report out 17th, 18th, 19th of November, in the middle of November. And the reason we wanted to wait till after the election, because we're committed to the nonpartisanship of this. And we wanted it to be for whoever takes the oath of office on January 20, 2021. I know there are a lot of students on, and I look forward to answering questions about kind of what's the best thing to study and internships, but I think I've gone on for too long at the moment, and so I'd be glad to take any questions or, very importantly, any comments anybody might have on our project. And so, Angela, thank you very much, and Emma, again, thank you for the introduction.
Thank you, Ambassador Grossman. Ladies and gentlemen, the way that we like to do this is have you ask your questions in the chat, please. I believe Emma's got maybe a couple to start us off with, but if you've got any kinds of questions at all, please go ahead and submit them in the chat. Before you ask your first one, Emma, though, Barb wants to follow up with something you said. What is the % now of career foreign service versus professional foreign service?
Yeah, thank you very much. I should have said. So from generally, from the time of Kennedy to the time of President Obama, it was about 2/3 professional, 1/3 non-career. And that seemed to work pretty well. But in both President Obama's administration and President Trump's administration, that number has gone up and up and up. And so we're now more or less kind of in the 60-40 range. And so our view is that's too high for non-career people. It doesn't give enough opportunity for people who spend their careers in the Foreign Service. And so we'd like to have a different number. And the number we are seriously contemplating putting out is 90-10. I must tell you that when we spoke to members of Congress the other day on the Democratic side, they said, you know, what are you, crazy? You know, that's not going to be possible. And we said, well, you know, then let's talk about this. Would you 70-30? How about 75-25? In other words, we're trying to get this conversation going by staking out a position that's pretty radical. We'll see. If somebody would like to legislate some number different than that in the 2/3, 1/3, 80-20, be fine with me. But I know I don't speak for my other co-chairs when I say that.
Emma, do you have a question to lead them off?
Absolutely. So there are tons of students here today, and a lot of us are looking for careers in international affairs, foreign affairs. What opportunities, jobs, internships helped prepare you for your career that you have now?
So thanks, Emma. One of the great things I think about being a student today and looking for jobs in international affairs is that the opportunities are so much broader than they were when I was looking. So I graduated, I went to the University of California, Santa Barbara. I went abroad, I was on an education abroad program. I got the bug for being interested in how other people live their lives, how other people set their priorities. And for me, the Foreign Service, to be an aid officer, maybe to go to the Peace Corps, really those were the only main opportunities at the time. And I am still, I must say to every student on this call, I'm still a big believer in the great career in the Foreign Service. And so I hope people will take the test, be enthusiastic, and get in. We're going to need great diplomats for years and years to come. But the lucky thing is for people today is, sure, there's the Foreign Service. And again, I'm biased. I put this at the top of my list. But there are many other opportunities. Non-governmental organizations, businesses with multinational businesses with presence all over the world. And other opportunities as well. And so I think that the great thing about looking for work now on this international side are the opportunities that are available. For me, you know, a lot of people ask me, well, should I study this? Should I study that? For me, I don't think that's as important kind of as getting this solid education, being interested in the world around you. Language is obviously always great. But it's the curiosity that drives people to be great at what they do internationally. It's the drive to be interested, excuse me, in other people. And so whether you're a history major or a math major or political science or international affairs, that it's the education that you get. Excuse me, it seems to me that's the most important thing. You know, I think about our business today. I'm back as a vice chairman of the Cohen Group. So what are we looking for? We're looking for people who can present, who can write, who can think fast, and all of those things are things that you should be focused on in your education. The second thing is internships. And yes, internships are really important. The State Department has got some. There are many kinds of internships in Washington, D.C. I think the important thing is to get one and not worry so much about what it is, because you need to get started. And one of the things that I think is hard to convey sometimes to young people, and I see many people a little bit older and like my age, I think you would agree with me that it's hard to convey that, you know, there's a randomness to this all. You have to be ready to grab the opportunities that come to you, but there's no real plan. And so it's keep going forward, and developing as many skills as you possibly can. So I apologize for going on for so long, but it's a subject that really interests me, and I say, lucky you, you've got enormous opportunities.
Dewey has his hand up there, Emma. Let's let Dewey unmute himself and ask. You have to unmute yourself though, Dewey. Uh-oh. Let me ask a question while Dewey's figuring it out. Kind of a follow-up to the one that Emma just asked. For some of the diversity you're looking for, perhaps, if not a course of study, are there soft skills that you would encourage people to develop that would put them in a better position to apply for a position in the diplomatic service?
Angela, what do you mean by a soft skill in that question?
Well, Angelica asked it. I think she's talking about communication skills, people-to-people skills, good organization, and keeping time schedules and commitments, those kinds of soft skills, getting along with a diverse crowd of people. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I guess I don't mean to be argumentative, but I wouldn't call those soft skills. I mean, those are the core skills that people need. I mean, my daughter's a mathematician, so if you say, well, that's a hard skill, yes, okay. But in her work, you know, does she still need to be able to do people to people and do all these other things? Absolutely. So as I say, you know, when I think back now, and again, we employ a lot of young people at the Cohen Group. What are we looking for? We're looking for people who are curious, who are purposeful, and as you very much said, who can present. Can they present in writing? Can they present orally? You know, I know it's a Twitter world and however many characters are on Twitter, but we still are a written business, and diplomacy is still a written business. And so writing and presenting, enormously important. And I'd also say, as you very much pointed out, the organizational skills as well. Deadlines, we're working to deadlines all the time. People have to be able to meet them, and that's self-organization. So wouldn't call them soft. In terms of diversity, I think one of the challenges of the State Department is that it's now got a reputation
Sally?
for not being diverse. And so I think people say, well, this isn't for me. And so there's going to have to be an enormous effort, not just in recruiting, but in the retention of diverse people in the State Department and making sure
I unmute myself.
Making sure that they can go forward. One of the things that we've really tried to emphasize in this business is that diversity is not enough. That inclusion has got to be part of it as well. And so you can invite people to the effort, but then they've got to be able to. One of the things that you'll see in a recommendation, which we got from a very interesting group of people, was to try to have an ROTC
turned on.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Mark. Dewey?
Yeah, do you hear me now?
Yeah, let me let you ask your question and then I'll mute you again.
Okay. Well, in my circle, if you really want to get into the meat of diplomacy, it isn't necessarily through the State Department. You go to West Point, you get a career in either artillery or infantry and earn your badge. Then you go to Harvard and you go to the international schools there, and you start out as a captain or a major, and you get into some kind of organization around the world, and that's how you build the career, and those are the people that get ahead. Now, that's just in my circle that I hear, and they do it reasonably well in the Navy. The Air Force has done lousy, and they know that, and they're trying to correct it.
Well, Dewey, thank you very much for that point, because it's very relevant to what I was trying to say about professional education. So you make exactly the right point. You go to West Point, but then what happens? Then what happens over your career, if you're an Army officer, or you're a naval officer, or a Marine, or the Navy, is that you get a series of opportunities for continuing education. So as I said, one of the hosts of our project, Harvard University, there are a dozen Army officers assigned to Harvard this year to get their master's degree. There's one person from the State Department. And that's not because of lack of interest at the State Department, that's because of budget. And so one of the things that I learned from Colin Powell was that every unit that he ever commanded had a 15% float for training and transit, right? He had the opportunity to send people to professional education. And we tried to create that while Powell was Secretary of State. He was very helpful to us, but it's evaporated because of Iraq and Afghanistan. And one of our recommendations is go back to that 15%, so that some people from the Foreign Service can go to Harvard. Some people from the Foreign Service can go to the service schools, the Army War College, the Navy War College, in larger numbers, so that people can go to the National War College. And right now, we don't have the people and we don't have the budget. And what we've said, we hope the Congress will do is legislate it just like it's legislated for the military.
Very good. Emma, you got the next one?
Yes. So what are some of the main challenges that you faced throughout your career working as a diplomat?
Well, the main challenge is really changed, because in the beginning of my time, my first post was Pakistan, 1977 to 79. And if you think about the evolution of many of our diplomatic posts from that time, it's gotten a lot more dangerous, and it's gotten a lot more challenging all around the world because of issues of terrorism, issues of these things. So for me, the biggest challenges were, as a younger officer, to try to learn my craft, to try to figure out what it is that diplomats were supposed to do, to practice it in some way that was successful, and also to try to understand how best to represent the United States. And I found that that was, of course, an enormous privilege. I told you, Emma, that I went to the University of California, Santa Barbara from 1969 to 73. And again, those of you who know the history of that time will guess that UC Santa Barbara was not perhaps the most patriotic place in the country in those years. But I found, after my taking the oath of office, that I found to myself to be highly patriotic, in the sense that I was honored to represent the United States. And so learning how to do that was a challenge. I'd say farther, as I got a little bit older and a little more senior, was then learning to be a leader and to have people follow me in places and ideas that where I was trying to take people to go. And as I got to the end of my career, the thing that I loved the most was this opportunity to try to kind of lead the people of the State Department, and it was a great privilege. But it's a challenge every day to get people to follow you. You got to have the right idea and the right motivation, and have people come along.
If I can follow up with that, because one of the points that Dewey was making, I think, is that some of those leadership skills you learn through your military career. But another question that comes through the chat is this idea of mission creep. So how much of being a representative of the United States abroad is the State Department, is the diplomatic stuff, and how closely do you need to work with the military side of things to achieve common goals and the best outcome for the United States?
Yes, well, one of the great things about this career is that you do get to work with people from all kinds of different services, not just the military services. When I think of the time that I was the U.S. ambassador to Turkey, I had what was called a country team. And that country team represented all of the agencies that were assigned there to Turkey. So people from the Agriculture Department, people from the Defense Department, people from the Treasury Department, people from the Commerce Department. And so it was the job of the Chief of Mission to try to bring everybody together to pursue U.S. interests as a whole. And I think one of the things that works in our foreign policy today is that country team. And why is that? Because every ambassador has a letter from the president that says you are responsible, you, the ambassador, are responsible for all of the bits and pieces of the United States government in the country to which you are assigned. Now, there's a big exception to that, which is military people who are assigned under a combatant commander. But for most people, they are responsible for everything that's going on in the United States in that country. And that's a great responsibility. And if people are good leaders, well, they've got a vision and they've got ideas and they try to bring people along. One of the big challenges, and we are going to try to deal with this in our report, is there's no similar effort made in Washington. In Washington, D.C., when you sit around an interagency table, nobody's really got the responsibility that an ambassador has through that letter. And so one of the things that we hope to recommend is that the President, Secretary of State, make it clear that there's a leadership aspect to what the State Department can do, not just abroad, but at home as well. And I recognize that'll have its controversies, but we think since country teams work, some effort like that in Washington might be very, very useful. And so, Angela, it's not just the military, it's all of the aspects of the United States government that have to come together to adequately represent our country overseas.
Very good.
All right, kind of going off of my previous question from before, I know we've kind of switched, but Catherine asked what the specific foreign policy challenges of the 21st century are that you can respond to with the reforms that your group wants to do. So what are your responses to the challenges that the 21st century presents?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Obviously, it's just an enormous number of challenges. I think I'd answer that question in two ways. One of them is that, like I said before, you can't foresee every option. You can't foresee everything that's going to come. And so what we were trying to do in our report, in our reforms, is try to create or recreate, revitalize an institution that's ready to meet whatever challenges come along. And I'm not trying to avoid the question. I'll come to the question. But I think it's really important to say that you can't create an institution that says, well, the only thing it's going to do is worry about terrorism. The only thing it's going to do is worry about great power rivalry. Or the only thing it's going to do is worry about how to do a better job with trade or investment abroad. It won't work because what will happen? Well, 9/11 happens or COVID happens. And so you have to have institutions that are ready to respond to things that come at you. And that's why I said before a little bit in terms of careers, you know, there's no plan, right? You have to be ready to meet the obligations and meet the challenges that come at you. We've talked about in our group, and you will see, I hope, reflected in the longer report, that there are a whole number of questions that have to do with the 21st century. You know, I think this question of great power rivalry, that's right. I think questions of climate change. I think questions of nationalism and patriotism. I think there are questions about the rise of China. I think there's a question about how to have the best, you know, how to have the closest relationship between the United States and allies. And so there are enormous numbers of subjects that will take up 21st century diplomacy. But here's the thing that I think is most important in the medium term. And the reason that I started my presentation with the question of citizen interest. And you may disagree with this, but let me make this proposition. So what I see at the moment is that, and COVID has really exposed this, I think, is that there's a misalignment between the interests of citizens, us, and the way that leaders define the national interest. And I think one of the reasons that countries around the world are struggling is because there's been this separation and this misalignment between those two things, citizen interest and national interest. And one of the big jobs, I think, no matter the specific subject, Emma, is to try to bring those things back into alignment. And so when we focus on how to make the U.S. diplomatic service relevant to, responsive to, important to U.S. citizens, that's the kind of issue we're trying to get at. And I think it underlies a lot of the questions that people will be answering this issue or that issue.
And to that end, Rachel puts in a question, I think that ties in with that there's a great divide between the consulting firms and the Foreign Service. In your opinion and experience with the Cohen Group, for example, is it easy to transition from consulting to the Foreign Service or vice versa?
Well, we haven't, I say we haven't had much experience with the vice versa, with people going at senior levels anyway, from consulting. There are people who have experienced, young people of ours who worked at the Cohen Group who've taken the Foreign Service exam and are in the Foreign Service. And they're in their third or fourth tours. And I think, I'm biased obviously, but I hope that the 5 years or so that they spent at the Cohen Group helped them with their Foreign Service lives, because they had a chance to see some retired Foreign Service officers. They had a chance to do things for American businesses, which is really important overseas. And to go back to the very first answer, they had a chance to practice presenting and making their case. So as I say, we've had, I guess over the years now, I've been with the Cohen Group 15 years, except for the 2 I was recalled. Let's say we've had 3 or 4 people go into the Foreign Service. We've had a number of people go into the State Department of Civil Service people, a number of people go into the Treasury Department, a number of people go into the Defense Department and the Commerce Department. And so I hope that their experience at the Cohen Group served them well. In terms of the other way, for people coming out of the Foreign Service and into business, let's say, not just consulting, you know, it's different. And it's different because money is a driving factor in business, obviously, in a way that it's not so much in public service. If you're at the State Department, you come to work every day, your inbox is all filled with events and news and things you have to respond to. Well, that's not true. All of you who are in business listening to this call or we're in business know that you don't fill up your own inbox, you're out of business. And so that's something we have to teach people. And so there are differences, but the basic curiosity, drive, purposefulness, a desire to get up in the morning and do something right for somebody, those things translate pretty well.
Good. I'm going to pull another one from the chat, Emma, from, I apologize, I'm going to wreck your name. Onlysian has wondered about if we have representatives working with our Iranian American and Syrian populations here in America. The student says, I have met many from these communities over the last 5 years, and I'm worried how we handle events in their home countries as they unfold and maintain a sense of unity with them. And I think unity with them here. I am thinking of how positive the young are about living here in America and standing for their country's freedoms. Is that part of
great questions? I'd say, first of all, let me say 3 things. One is, I think it's very important for the State Department to be staying in touch with diaspora communities. And I think those people at the State Department who are doing their jobs the best will be connected to diaspora communities of all kinds, because they, as you say, play a very important part in making up the totality of the United States. So I'll give you an example from my life. When I was the U.S. Ambassador to Turkey, you know, I was obviously very, very interested in the diaspora of Greek Americans, of Armenian Americans, Turkish Americans. Why? Because I wanted Greek Americans and Armenian Americans to understand what I was trying to do in Turkey. When I think about being recalled to be special representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan, I mean, there's an enormous, enormous Pakistani American community in the United States. And so we tried to keep in very close contact with that community because they have interests in what's going on, obviously, in Pakistan. Same with Indian Americans. You think about Indian Americans today, they have a wonderful representation, and there's an India caucus on Capitol Hill. So if you're working on Afghanistan and Pakistan, you're certainly trying to make sure that you're involved in those communities. That's the first thing. Second thing is, I also believe that it's one of the answers to the questions, to the question about a more diverse State Department and a more diverse Foreign Service. And so if you think back to 1979, what happened? Well, hundreds of thousands of Iranians moved to the United States to flee what was going on in Iran. And what do you know? Well, they're now Iranian-American Foreign Service officers, the sons and daughters of those people. There are Vietnamese-American Foreign Service officers, the sons and daughters of people who fled Vietnam in 1975. And so I hope that these diaspora communities will also, over time, be interested in joining the Foreign Service. I know how benefited I was as the Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan to have Pakistani Americans, Indian Americans working for us because one, they understood the culture, they understood the nuances, and oh my goodness, we could put them on television in Pakistan and they could speak in a way that I could not. And so these diaspora communities, I think, are very important in many ways.
Very good.
So you talked a lot about bridging the gap between national interest and citizens' interest, and how to bring those back into alliance. How do you think that we can reconnect the public with the importance of international affairs? Because it seems like a lot that the people are returning to more of a America first and fear of other countries and seeing them as enemies. So how do we kind of fix that and change the ideology of there are enemies to maybe allying with them in foreign affairs?
Yeah, well, first of all, again, the easiest answer to that is that's one of the great, one of the great jobs, but also one of the great requirements of World Affairs Councils of America. When you think of an organization that was started just after World War I to support the League of Nations, and here we are all these years later, these are still core elements of the conversation to have people be involved in international affairs. That's the first thing. Second thing is, I think one of the failures that we point out in the Foreign Service, in the State Department, is that by and large people have become stuck inside the Beltway and don't take the chance to make the case for the importance of U.S. engagement abroad. And to do that, I think you have to open up your aperture here. I think people often think, oh, well, this is all, about military questions, this question or that question. But, I think that the United States is not going to be successful unless we can continue to sell our goods abroad and export, right? We're not going to be successful unless we are part of the technological revolutions all over the world. So, I think my wife is from Kansas City. So when I first started to go there, now many years ago, people said, well, we don't really have much interest in foreign affairs. But a little bit like Peoria, you think about what goes on in Kansas City today. Sprint is headquartered in Kansas City. Black & Veatch, one of America's great international construction companies, headquartered in Kansas City. Agriculture, one of America's greatest exports, Kansas City. So in all of these ways, you have to start to learn to talk about these issues in a way that people will respond to them, right? So you can't, I don't think, stand up in an audience in Peoria or Kansas City, and give a long lecture about the theory of international affairs. I mean, maybe you can in some places, but what you have to do is to say, this matters to people all around the country. That's the message that needs to get out, first of all. Second thing is, I do think that there's been an important kind of set of clarity here about some of the things that have happened internationally over the last few years. So if you ask me, what is one of the reasons that people are today tired of international affairs? I think one of the reasons people are tired of international affairs is because international affairs has also become synonymous with globalization and globalization. And so sure, globalization has been an enormous benefit to a lot of people. Hundreds of millions of people have come out of poverty. Many people in the United States have benefited from globalization. But millions of people in the United States have not benefited from globalization. Their jobs are gone. They haven't had a pay raise in 25 years. And for them, this connection to the outside world isn't paying off for them. And nobody has yet been able to make the case in a convincing way that that's actually, it's an important part of America's presence abroad. I think people in the United States see these long wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they say, for what purpose? And so I think there are very legitimate questions that have come into the open now, again, about the way that some people define national interest in a way that's not consistent with larger citizen interest. And I think it's really important. And no future foreign service, and I'd venture to say that no future foreign policy of the United States will be successful unless it recognizes that for millions of people in the United States of America, the last 20 years have not been successful, and they need to be in the future.
That's a really good discussion to have, and in this political season, you know, Emma's question about, you know, how do you get people past their fear to talking about the people and the real issues and how it actually affects me directly. I have another more technical question about the State Department and diplomacy. In a previous session that I paid attention to, you talked about the cones, the career cones in the Foreign Service, and the difficulty of switching between the cones. Can you explain that just a little bit, especially for the students here?
Well, sure. So at the moment, the State Department has got silos, cones, and you can come in as a political officer, an economic officer, administrative officer, public diplomacy officer, consular officer. And what happens is that people get slotted in these cones, and they get slotted in these silos. And, you know, human beings are human beings, and so little tribes develop. And so there's a little political officer tribe and a consular officer tribe. And then what happens is people start to say, well, my silo is better than your silo. And so one of the things that we will recommend is to get rid of this system. And the reason is not so much because of the competition, it's because we can't understand the logic of saying that if you are a consular officer, that you don't do public diplomacy. How can that be? Because if you're a young consular officer, you probably see more representatives of the host government that you're in than anybody else in the embassy on any day, because you're meeting 50 people a day to talk to them about their visas. And if you're not doing public diplomacy, well, then you were missing an enormous opportunity. Similarly with American citizen services. Consular officers do American citizen services. If you lose your passport abroad, you go to the consulate. And if I'm the ambassador, what do I want? I want somebody there who's doing public diplomacy, who will welcome you, who will commiserate with you, and quickly will get you a new passport. And that's public diplomacy. And the idea that political officers don't do economic work, and that economic people don't do, you know, administrative work is crazy. And so we're going to recommend that this just be pitched overboard, that everybody's got responsibility, and that the way forward is through promotion for people who can show their capacity in all different kinds of areas. Now, I want to be clear, that's not to say that there shouldn't be some specialization. And if you would like to, like my spouse, who was a foreign service officer, want to spend your career focused on consular work, please do that. But we want to break through. And the other thing is, we're also looking for ways to bring in new skills, right? So you'll notice of those 5 cones, data science wasn't one of them. Science wasn't one of them. And so we need a way to kind of also bring in new skills that can help the Foreign Service throughout.
Very good. So that's part of the cultural changes within the State Department you were talking about, that's something internal, those tribes that need to work a little bit past that. But,
yes.
But the bottom line is there's a wide range of skills that can be applied toward a career, an international career, whether it's through the State Department or the Department of Agriculture or, you know, all kinds of private, non-governmental organizations, all of it.
Right. Well, when you think about the Foreign Service, you know, technically the Foreign Service is at the State Department, but there's a Foreign Commercial Service, there are Foreign Service officers, there's a Foreign Agricultural Service, there are Foreign Service officers, and USAID officers are Foreign Service officers. And so there's scope across many different kinds of fields.
Yeah. And for the diversity and inclusion question, there was one more early on I wanted to raise about Foreign Service officers with families. Are there restrictions on having a family abroad? Do they frown upon marrying a local person? Those kinds of things?
Yeah, no. People can by and large marry who they want. I'd say now the restriction on families is the safety question. And so again, to go back to when I joined the Foreign Service many years ago, I'd say the number of posts where families were not allowed because of safety was tiny. It's much larger now. So let's say, for example, I was single, I went to Pakistan. But let's say that you had a family and you were assigned to Pakistan. So your family's not going to Pakistan because it's not allowed, because it's too dangerous. If you're assigned to Afghanistan, your family's not going because it's not allowed. If you're assigned to India, families go all the time. And so that changes, obviously, by the perception of threat or the reality of threat. So the big restriction now on families is safety and where people can go that's safe enough for families. People have their own questions, of course, as their children get older, questions of education, harder to find a good high school than a good elementary school. So there are lots of family dynamics, but for the service itself and the State Department itself, the restrictions now focus in on safety.
Would you imagine that having a family abroad would be a bonus that demonstrates that you, the representative of the government of the United States, is just like you, the people to whom I'm representing the government of the United States? We have family, we have kids, we worry about the same issues.
Sure. So there's three things. One is that the point that you make, which it shows that people in the United States are normal and they have families. And again, a very important diversity point and inclusion point is you want the Foreign Service, you want your diplomats to look and represent the United States, right? So that's a very important question. So yes, number one. Number two, there's just the pure human connection that you make with other people when you have a family. And again, I don't mean to say in any way, shape, or form that single people who go abroad don't have a great time. They do, because they make their own connections. But for example, our daughter was a preschooler when we were in Turkey. And, so who did I meet? Well, I met all the other preschool parents. And they didn't treat me like the Ambassador of the United States of America too much. I stood on the sidelines at the soccer games, and I went to pageants, and so that's a very good thing. And then finally, really importantly as well, and again, people make their own choices, but people who, by and large, people who raise their children abroad, these kids have enormous opportunities, right? They learn languages early. They see other people. They're fantastic with adults because it's an adult kind of situation that they're in many times. And so there's a reason that lots of Foreign Service brats, Foreign Service children end up in the Foreign Service. There's a reason that people end up in good places is because they've had an interesting upbringing.
Very good. Very good. Emma, do you have another one?
Yes, I do. I just have a fun question. What is your favorite part about being a Foreign Service officer?
Oh, I thought for me, the most fun part was to represent the United States. And really, Emma, when I joined, I had no idea that would be my answer all these years later. But I loved it all. I loved the people. I thought traveling around was fantastic. But the thing that was most fun was to stand up and speak on behalf of the United States. I found that to be very, very enjoyable and very satisfying. And I will tell you, I know this is recorded, so I don't send this back to the Cohen Group, but it's the thing I miss the most, right? I love the Cohen Group, truly I do. But people come to see me all the time. They say, oh, I'm gonna leave, I'm gonna retire. Okay. I say, but here, listen to me. So there's no substitute for working in an office where the American flag flies. And that's true. I know there are lots of other people on the call. That's true, I'm sure, all diplomacy. But for me, the great thing was to represent the United States.
Very good. So a few people have asked for good, I have one last question, but what are good places for students to hunt for internships, experience opportunities, experiential learning, and I've already flipped past it. And do you want, can students contact you? Do you want to, or would you prefer they go through, look for an internship with the State Department, that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me answer the first question. So as I say, the opportunities these days are pretty endless. The challenge for students these days is whether internships pay or not. And so one of the big problems of the State Department is they got a lot of internships and not so many of them pay. Or they got internships abroad, but you have to get there yourself. And so this is really a problem, but the opportunities exist. I also think, and we haven't talked about it enough, is the Congress, and especially the House of Representatives. This is a great place to get started because the Hill is dominated by young people, and there are many, many opportunities there for internships and also for entry-level positions. We have an intern program at the Cohen Group. I'd be delighted to take anybody's information and get it to the people who run that program. I luckily don't have anything to do with the State Department internship program anymore, but I do have something to do with the Cohen Group internship. And so whoever is interested in that, please be in touch with me, and I will make sure that your resume or CV gets to the right people who put our internship program together. We experimented this year. We took on 11 interns, which was no small matter on Zoom, I'll tell you. But we decided that we'd hired these people. We were going to do our best. It wasn't great. It wasn't as great as the year before. I hope next year we won't be in the same position. But we proceeded. We did it, and I think we did the best we could.
Very good. And then, if I can ask the last question of the day, the last one is, you have seen a lot of ups and downs in relations between the United States and the rest of the world. How do you assess the current situation? How is our diplomatic corps doing today? And what do you think, where can we improve today?
Well, I think there's a lot. I mean, first of all, I think the diplomatic corps today is doing everything they can to represent the United States of America. And so you will see, I think, in the document that we circulated and in our final report, that we honor the people who serve today. That if we criticize something in this report, it's not to disparage the people who are representing our country today. Indeed, on a number of occasions, this report is for them. We hope that these things will help them do a better job, have a better career, have a better life. And so, we spent our lives at the Foreign Service, at the State Department. We want it to succeed. And so you'll see there, we honor the people who are there today. I think they've got a hard job. I think they do it as best they can. And what really inspires me is the people who go out there every day, both in Washington, D.C. and abroad to represent the United States. So I think there's a lot of things, obviously, that we need to do going forward. For me, and again, this may be a bias from my career, I think the most important thing for me would be to kind of reinvigorate alliances, in the sense that what's the greatest thing the United States has going for it that a Russia or a China doesn't really have? We've got real allies, and we've got real friends. And I think in the world going forward, the more that we can work with those allies and friends, the more we can make common cause with them, the more we can, to go back to Emma's question about jointly defining what the big issues are out there in the future, the better off we're going to be.
Very good. Well, thank you, Ambassador Grossman. This has been really enlightening and I think very helpful for the students as well as for the rest of us who are just plain interested. So I appreciate you spending your time with us today. On behalf of the Peoria Area World Affairs Council, I'd like to thank the International Affairs Organization at Bradley, and Emma, thank you. A couple of the other officers are also in on the call, Angelica and Ariana. So I'd like to also thank all of the students from around the world who have joined us for this presentation as well. And for the World Affairs Council, for the Peoria Area World Affairs Council, we have our global news, Global Peoria, on Thursday night at 7 o'clock. And on Friday, Joshua Zulu will talk to us about, Zambia. I almost said Zimbabwe, but Zambia on Friday. So come join us. Everyone have a good work week at school. Don't get behind. And thank you, Ambassador Grossman.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the chance.
Okay.